The one thing I would have an immediate bias was towards the Middle East.
I identify as transgender nonconforming.
It's not often assumed that I'm part black.
Do you think that being gay is a choice?
I can't be sure.
Who should police the police?
The citizens.
That actually scares me.
If I had to have a conversation with my kids about this, I wouldn't know pretty much where to start.
How I treat and talk to my children is very much reflective of the environment that they walk into every day.
I'm a lawyer by trade.
So I gotta watch what I say. I've been a cop for 20 years.
We must understand that, how we've been weaponized, against the Black community.
Hello, everybody. My name is Jesse Williams. I want to welcome everyone joining us today as we discuss bias, conscious and unconscious bias and its impact on us personally and the collective. I am here now because I feel like we're experiencing a real opportunity. The real opportunity is in the public consciousness with all that's happening in the world and in our nation. We are primed, I think, to accept the possibility that maybe we have some room for improvement. Maybe there are some things that we can learn about ourselves and each other that will allow us to grow forward. So part of that is acknowledging conscious and unconscious bias, the roles that we might be playing in this whole equation. I think it's really incredibly important for us to face it, talk about it, be open to that possibility. Everyone has bias, myself included. It is a real issue, and it's something that we can address and just learn more about. It doesn't make anybody inherently wrong. It's something that's worthy of exploring. So over the next few hours, we're going to do just that. We're going to watch a series of conversations between complete strangers meeting for the first time, and they're going to discuss not only themselves, but issues that bring up the concept of bias in their lives. This might be uncomfortable at times. It certainly has moments of discomfort for them. It might for you as well. Feelings could be hurt, but that's part of the process. That's how growth happens. So amidst that discomfort, these are all opportunities for learning for us. So before we dive deeper, I do want to acknowledge how we've come here today. That can't do that without thanking Procter Gamble for spreading the word and spearheading this effort. That also includes BuzzFeed, who's allowing us to use their platform. So thank you so much. For years, P&G has been using their voice and acting as a leading advertiser to shine a light on inequality, highlighting bias in particular with their recent work in the last couple of years, and sparking a dialogue to promote understanding, to promote action. So I'm not going to do this alone. We are going to dial up the incredible Freddie Ransome, who is a content creator, has a lot of insight around bias, and she's going to help us walk through this whole experience and be a great asset to us today.
Hey, Jesse, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm good. I'm excited for what today's going to hold. Just to, give everyone a little bit more detail about the ins and outs of this experiment, we've paired 14 strangers together to talk about bias. And these are real people. They are here because they want to have dialogue and they want to experience some personal growth. So please be respectful to them in the comments, even if you don't agree on what they're saying, because we're all friends here. We're all just here to learn and take in new information or just sort of spread light and share light to each other in regards to experiences and personal biases.
It's interesting, and when talking to new people or strangers, I think folks can relate to being at a party or a new gathering, and you just find yourself kind of pouring your heart out to somebody you just met. I think the idea that it won't definitely follow you in your social circle or your family event, you've got a little bit of freedom to just kind of unload something, to explore something, experiment, play around with ideas without it being kind of attached to you, like the static cling, and you're going to have to be accountable for it later. We all carry with us learned assumptions, presumptions. We all are a byproduct of media and marketing and information and cartoons and commercials. Also, now's a good time just to let folks know it's not only Freddie and myself participating today. We are really lucky to have an absolutely brilliant professor, Dr. Charisse Lepre, sharing her incredible talents and wherewithal. Professor Lepre is at Syracuse University, where she currently focuses on how the media affects the way we think about ourselves, exactly what we're talking about, our perceptions of ourselves and others. We've been working with her to bring an added layer of context and facts into this discussion. those pesky things that are necessary. Beyond just watching, we're going to be posting discussion prompts in the comments, so pay attention to those if you could. This allows us all to be able to join the conversation from an informed perspective. So be sure to add your thoughts and questions there as well. This is a safe space, so please don't succumb to any habits. So, we've all been in comment sections and we can see how it can get childish and ugly quickly. Let's elevate today. Let's make that a safe space so we can have constructive conversations. And now, while we have paired strangers together, they're not entirely random. We intentionally went about this in a curated fashion to encourage discourse beyond their echo chamber. These have been really expansive, long conversations when we've paired these strangers together. So we've naturally had to edit them down for time. We do that in the most responsible way.
So in order to catalyze these conversations, we have passed along P&G's award-winning short film called The Look to all of these pairings so that they can watch it together, and it can be a great way to spark conversation about bias.
Let's start with our first pairing. We have Chozy joining us from Atlanta, Georgia, and we have Lynn in North Carolina. So we have them dialed up and meeting each other for the very first time for an interesting conversation.
All right, let's do it.
Hello.
Hi.
How you doing?
Well, I'm well today. And yourself?
I'm doing great. I'm just excited about this experience.
Isn't this something? My name's Lynn.
Lynn?
Lynn.
Hi, my name is Chozy.
Oh, come on, no.
I can definitely relate to the beginning, getting the weird looks for looking different.
I can't believe this stuff still happens, and I know it does, and I cannot understand why.
Yeah.
We so judge each other on the way we immediately appear. Where do you think that comes from?
The reason I think a lot of people think that way, which is not only in the US, it's a global thing, is just lack of interaction with people that are different than you. I am originally from East Jerusalem, Palestine, and I came here in 2001, 3 weeks before September 11. So when I came here, I was saying I'm Middle Eastern, I'm Palestinian, I'm Muslim, and it's just who I am. I didn't think anything of it. So September 11 happens, and all of a sudden there's this hate for anybody that looks Middle Eastern. So if you're brown, you're going to be a target. It doesn't matter if you're Arab, Indian, Hispanic, mixed black and white, just dark featured. And a lot of people got harassed and attacked on campus at Georgia Southern. And I was like, I'm not going to go out and say that I'm Middle Eastern. I'm going to have to dodge it, lie it, try to be a chameleon. But it's hard to be a chameleon when the majority is black and white and nobody looks like me.
What I'm hearing you say is that it comes from non-exposure to different types of people, and they're visually different, and we have to judge immediately the one kind of group that you can see my ignorance. I think when I thought about biases towards people, the one thing I would have an immediate bias was towards whatever I would call, and you're right, it's ignorant, the Middle East, because it's different. And so as we've had more immigrants and as I've been able to meet more people, you see, my views change. And this is the only way that we can break down these conclusions. It's kind of embarrassing here to admit that I've had these biases. It's embarrassing, but I have not really been able to interact very much with people like yourself, Chozy. So I don't know how the universe knew that you're the person I probably needed to talk most to.
Yeah. I've been in churches here when I came to the US, and I've been to Baptist churches, and I'm looking around and I see this poster of a white person that looks like Kurt Cobain from Nirvana with blonde hair, blue eyes on a cross. And I'm like, who is that? And he's like, this is Jesus. And I'm like, what? Jesus from Bethlehem. Jesus was a Jewish person from Bethlehem in Palestine. If you go to Palestine right now, nobody's blonde, blue hair, blue eyes. I'm considered light-skinned. People are a little bit darker than me. I don't care what the census says that we are. I'm not treated like I'm a white person when I come to America. I'm accepted by blacks more than whites.
Where I grew up in Northern California, there was a lot of dissension with black people. We didn't even have anybody from Palestine or Jerusalem. We didn't have Jewish people. And I drove through the part of town that was black. And because I was white, they threw a rock at me because they were angry. And that was when integration was starting, and they would bring black people and black children and white people and white children together. We're people and we're doing the best we can, and it's not real good. But if we keep talking about it and meeting each other, and if I can see your pain, and maybe you can see my embarrassment, because that's just who I am, and I'm still trying to change.
Let me let you picture this. 400 years ago, you've been brought to this country in shackles, enslaved. Let's say they traded your people for money. They gave you freedom, but everything you ever build, they will burn, and they always will make you feel like you're the bad person. So no matter what you do and how high you get in life, you will still be that slave. How would you feel? Would you throw a brick at somebody?
I would probably try to burn everything down because it's so unfair. It's so unfair. I really honestly feel if I had been at the scene where George Floyd was being killed, because I'm a little white woman, I probably could have jumped in there and they would have been busy because I'm not a threat.
It's called white
They don't
privilege.
see me, the police don't see me as a threat. I've been pulled over and let go, and they've said to me, if you were black, I'd take you in, but you're not. How do we change this, Chozy? How do we do this?
People need to be aware of their white privilege. During 9/11, I was walking back to my dorm. I don't know what's going on. I've been in America for 3 weeks. I walk in. I'm looking at the big TV in the lobby. I see a building on fire, people jumping, and chaos. And I'm like, oh, this looks like back home. Why? Because we see this every day. This is nothing new. So from that day on, Middle Easterns and Muslims has suffered 10 times more till this day. And they burned mosques, they killed Muslims, they banned Muslims from coming to this country. Well, I thought this country is based on freedom to worship to practice any religion.
I'm very moved by your description of exactly how you were treated, Chozy, and the ignorance. It makes me cry. It makes me really embarrassed. But things are changing. People are moving all over, and we need to help people like you change it.
Actually, change begins with people like you that are thinking about these issues but still not taking action. The smallest action you can take is, number one, surround yourself with people that are different than you. Number two, talk to people, your family. Know how to talk to them with having a constructive conversation that can have criticism and some defense and offense, but we have to unite the people. We have to put our differences on the side. We can't just keep bringing these biased and prejudiced and racist things that keeps dividing us.
I'm so moved by what you said, Chozy, and I understand that the actions that I take are to talk, to be aware, but talk to people, especially as I meet them. because I'm probably not at all what I appear. And I didn't tell the producers that, I'm gay. And certainly I've had beer bottles thrown at me, and I have not wanted to bother anybody. I just wanted to be left alone and be myself, whatever that is. And I've pretended a lot because I can get away with pretending.
So you're with a woman?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So you didn't mention that, so I'm glad you mentioned that, because then you would have kind of experienced a lot more of what we experience.
I never really said too much about it because I just felt like it's nobody's business, and honestly, I lied about it because it could. I mean, you can't see that I'm gay. As I've grown and seen the things that people have gone through and the way that gay men were treated in the 80s with the AIDS epidemic, and losing so many people that were my friends and no one cared, it does make sense that if I had really stood up and copped to the whole thing and made a stand and said, no, you don't treat people this way because these people are me. And if you like me, then you like gay people, right? But here in Hendersonville, North Carolina, I've been actually legally married. And that is a form of acceptance. And I have nephews and nieces who have grown up and they don't think a thing about this because of their exposure to people that were gay. And they go, well, so what's the big deal?
I thank you for sharing that with me, because that's part of who you are. There's no way to see that or tell that. So that was pretty interesting twist. And it kind of changed the whole aspect of this call, because I knew then I can definitely relate and make you relate mostly to what I've been feeling, and have empathy as well for what you've been going through. And I know the struggle, because I'm from the Middle East. We're not open for that. And my cousin is gay. He sings, he tries to make a noise about it so he can get the equality and the freedom. I want you to do the same.
So I had this epiphany while you were talking that this is how bias changes, is that you've had this conversation with me, and maybe you'll be with somebody or your family in one way, and they'll talk about something, but you've had this experience. You'll go, well, there was this time I talked to this woman, and believe me, if I see anybody from Palestine, it's going to be, well, I talked to this man, and he was from Palestine, and he's in this country, and this is how he feels.
I want to thank you, Lynn, for doing this. And I want to also thank you for sharing with me and being able to listen and respond and have a very healthy conversation. Thank you.
Well, Chozy, I think the best part about talking to you, I'm sitting here realizing that, I just came out to the entire world. And I did that because of you and because of what you and the people that produced you have been through, and you made me understand the pain, and you've helped me really immeasurably. Look at all the things I said. I owe that to you, sir. I do. How about that? Go figure. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so that was Chozy and Lynn. Really, a little plot twist towards the end. I know for me personally, when I was watching the video, I was not expecting her to say that she was a part of the queer community and that she's married and has this whole other part to her story that at least I was unaware of at the beginning. So that was kind of interesting. And I think also, kind of in real time, this bias is sort of playing out. It's like, I'm thinking like, oh yeah, she's, cis heterosexual white woman who probably hasn't really experienced a lot of turmoil in terms of identity. And that's just me, making that assumption. And then to find out that, actually she has experienced this, Okay, now I'm sort of getting a better understanding of who she is.
Yeah, what was interesting to me was how it impacted Chozy immediately. It always makes folks feel more comfortable having conversations with people who can or are willing to understand them, whatever that means. And a big part of that is a shared actual experience. Parents talking about how hard it is to have children, they can relate to actual parents much better than some single person with no kids. Right. And
Exactly.
it's really that basic. So when Chozy thinks he's talking to somebody who kind of fits all the dominant boxes, most of them outside of gender, to hear, oh, well, you actually have to deal with identity, with making yourself small, with making yourself quiet, with not always identifying yourself in a way that would make you a target. Okay, we're actually on closer footing than I thought. That makes me see you slightly different, or maybe feel more comfortable expressing my experience in a way that has a better shot of being received. I think you watched Lynn certainly, for lack of a better term, kind of mature and grow and settle into her comfort zone.
Yeah, you love to see it. And I can say too, like, I was really happy that Lynn was self-aware in the fact and, confident in sort of admitting that she lied about her sexuality for years because she knew that she could. She could sort of slide under the radar as outwardly, I guess, presenting as, a straight white woman, walking through the world. And that was interesting because I think that sort of transcends in so many different scenarios, whether you can, pass race-wise or ethnically or in terms of religion, sexuality. I think that we all could come to the table with certain areas where we can pass, and we sort of use that for survival. I don't necessarily think that it's that she's ashamed, but a lot of times it's about safety. So that's something that stood out to me.
A couple things that I clocked, not because they were new, but actually because they're fairly common in my lived experience, is what bias can do is it can minimize or isolate the experiences of others. While Chozy explains some of his experience and the discrimination that he goes through. I mean, can you imagine being Palestinian, landing here 3 weeks before 9/11 in Atlanta, Georgia? The fear that he has just for how do you go out and get coffee every day? You're going out and it could possibly be, we saw hate crimes obviously skyrocket. And as he describes some of this, you see what I've seen commonly, I imagine you have as well, Freddie, is this kind of incredulousness from your white acquaintance. I had no idea, totally either blind or reflexively presenting themselves as blind to the lived experiences of those around us. Oh, no way. Can you believe it? I had no idea something like this would happen. And so it's the combination of distancing, minimalizing that experience, whether consciously or not, and then making the burden of solving it on the person of color.
It's sort of the whole idea that racism is an issue that the marginalized community has to solve, or it's like a Black issue or an Asian issue or whichever community that is, and it is not. It is a white issue, an issue of the oppressor and of those with privilege and those in power.
Yeah.
All right, so let's move on to our next pairing, and it's going to be JC and Garnet, both of whom are currently based in Arizona.
All right.
Hello?
Hi.
Hi, my name's Garnet.
I'm JC.
Hi, JC. I love your outfit.
Thank you. Where are you located?
I'm in Arizona. Where are you at?
Oh, that's where I'm currently safer at home.
Really?
Yeah. No, we're getting stared at. Okay, now as this individual, I am very nervous.
That was scary.
Yeah.
We're in court?
Are we the attorney? Are we the judge? Are we the jury?
Oh, please let him be the judge. Oh, thank God.
Yes.
What got me the most was the moment we were in the courtroom, my mind thought, okay, they're bringing out the defendant and it's his POV. I was viscerally relieved when that wasn't the case.
Yeah, automatically I'm like, oh my God, I'm nervous. And I'm nervous because I hope that this person isn't going to get prosecuted for incorrect reasons. So I think I was trying to compensate with like, I hope he's the judge. I hope he's the attorney. I hope he's the jury, you know, so I could like also breathe a sigh of relief from it as well.
I think that I'm not immediately identified by other people, especially people who are white. It's not often assumed that I'm part black. It's just assumed that I'm not white, which is not quite the same, especially now. For most of my adult life, I had a shaved head. I used to get extra security screenings, pat downs, taken out of line, questioned in the back room with no windows, all the time. And I was basically being racially profiled. And it wasn't because I was part black, it's because I looked Middle Eastern. And my mom said, you need to shave your hair. My first instinct was like, yeah, that's a good idea. And then my next reaction was, no, that's the opposite of what I want to do, because that would mean I would be taking one more visibly at least part black individual out of the situation. And that's exactly what people who hate black people want to happen. They just want fewer black people around.
Yes, your hair is political. And I can relate to a lot of what you were talking about. I also traveled a lot as a flight attendant for the past 6 years.
Okay.
And I also was getting profiled a lot as like Middle Eastern. I've had pretty serious altercation with one pilot in the cockpit that was treating me really horribly. And they basically like were pinning me to like the inside of the cockpit door. And it was just so scary to have that.
That's tough. I'm sorry to hear that. I'm 25% black and I'm 75% white. I'm not American, I'm actually Canadian. But it wasn't until I arrived here in the US that people started to regularly recognize the black part of me. And mostly there were other black people. And so I started to, you know, I would go get my hair cut. You know, I would always seek out like the blackest barber shop. Because whenever I walked into a place like that, there was never like, who's this beige guy? You know, what's he about? They automatically were like, yeah, this guy's part black and he's part of this community.
I identify as transgender nonconforming. I basically wake up and every single day is a little gender reveal party to myself. Because
Really?
I kind of just like go with the flow. You know, I feel like today I'm like, I guess I'm feeling more masculine, feeling more feminine. So, but when I would go to work and have to wear a uniform with a tie, I would purposefully like find like one or two things to like express my gender, whether that was like the woman's purse or something. And like I would get constantly like asked by coworkers like, is that really are you allowed to do that? Like they're not saying anything to you, they're not writing you letters. And I'm like, I'm wearing a bag, the same bag you have, so why? No. And it was really frustrating to like have to constantly validate my gender or like myself, or even have to explain, especially to folks who didn't really want to be educated about it. They were just sort of like projecting their own views onto me.
That would be really challenging. Definitely challenging. I mean, I was in my early 20s and I had a roommate, and it was around that time that I started to sort of come into feeling out being part black and wanting to embrace that part of myself, because up until then I hadn't. I read Malcolm X's autobiography, and I mean, I even went and saw Louis Farrakhan speak, and you know, I was just exploring. And he kind of confronted me in a way that I wasn't expecting. And this is one of my best friends. He said, why are you reading that? Or why are you getting into all of this like black stuff? And I was like, well, you know, I'm part black, you know? And he's like, well, you're only 25% black. So why don't you just get over it and embrace the majority of yourself, which is white? And I was really angry, because the fact is that you only have to be a little bit non-white for people to see you as not white. And that can really, for lack of a better word, color your experience in the world.
Exactly. When you are in white spaces and you talk about your blackness, how is that received?
That's a good question. White people always want to ask what my background is.
Oh, girl. Yeah, same.
Where are you from? And I'm like, oh, well, originally I'm from Calgary. Where are your parents from? Oh, well, my dad's from Calgary and my mom's from Manitoba. They're like, no, but where are they really from? And I'm like, oh, I see. You're wondering why I'm not white. because they want to get to what race I am. Where do I fit into their idea of who I should be or what I represent?
I understand exactly what you're saying.
Was there ever a time in your life when you found yourself either suppressing a part of your identity, whatever that may be, in order to make a social situation or any situation easier or more comfortable for everyone in the room kind of thing?
I was like 12 or 13 years old, and I just wanted to be like a manic pixie dream girl that like sits on countertops and is cute and weird. And I just wanted to be that for myself, right? So I was expressing like myself in that way. And I remember these men in my family pulled me aside and they were, "You're acting feminine and you need to like macho up because you're turning into like a young man," and blah, 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 blah. Like that's the way it felt. Oh my God, I'm doing something wrong and this really hurts my family and I'm being shameful. And that moment got internalized for years, like 10, 14, whatever years. Even if I'm trying to just change like my diet, I feel like I have to like almost feel ashamed of like my lifestyle as I explain it to my family. And it comes from just years and years of never getting my needs met or being seen as, you know, who I am. Yeah.
And this might strike you as, I don't know how you're going to take this, but a time when I've suppressed something about myself is I like karaoke.
Yes.
And when I was in Toronto, I was a karaoke host for a long time, full time. And the best place that I hosted at was it was a gay bar. And when I worked there, I found myself inwardly embracing the fact that maybe people thought I was gay because I happened to be hosting a karaoke show in a gay bar. And I was happy about that.
This actually brings up an important question that I think is relevant. How do we consume and appreciate and amplify voices that need to be heard without being appropriating and or gaining anything from it? Because as an ally, clearly I see you as an ally for LGBT community, especially working and hosting in a gay bar and being super comfortable in there. But in what ways has your white passing experience, how has that showed up for you?
I worked in a place that was a very high-level private members club. I don't even think there were any black members. And I was witness to people talking about things that were blatantly racist, like telling like N-word jokes and stuff. I'm standing right there and I'm thinking to myself, oh, they don't realize I'm part black. And so at the moment, I just didn't say anything because I didn't want to have that confrontation in that environment.
I want to just do a quick little example I had from when I was a flight attendant, and I was in the back of the airplane and we were in flight, and all of a sudden I heard some music or something happening in the cabin, and I instantly went to this black couple to go ask them to turn off their phones or their speakers or whatever. And when I went there, they had nothing. And then I was like, "Excuse me." And then they just looked at me and they were like, "What's up?" And I'm like, oh my God, I just did something that was super biased. It just really showed me the bias that I had. I was just so inappropriate.
JC, let me ask you a question. Why do you think bias is dangerous?
I don't think bias itself is necessarily the danger. It's not recognizing that you have bias that is dangerous. That eventually trickles down to resentment, and then to hate, and then to extreme actions that are just inexcusable and dangerous for so many folks.
Do you think that knowing that people have conscious and unconscious biases, do you think it's possible for people to overcome them?
Not only do I think that it's possible for people to overcome their biases, I think people's lives depend on it right now. People need to recognize their own bias and how they can show up and fix those biases for literally the survival of Black people. They can no longer just show up by posting pictures on Instagram, even walking in marches. It's like, do this now because it's important right now in history, but do this from now on and call it out when you see it and call it out within yourself. And like, also don't take offense to it because you learned it somewhere, but now you can unlearn it. And after you do that, you have the opportunity to change as well.
Well, and I think you're right. And I think it's more important to talk about firstly, our own bias, our personal bias, because calling out someone else's bias is easy to do, but it also creates confrontation. But I think if people witness one another acknowledging their own bias, I think that will open up the ability for people to have a more sort of truthful, honest dialogue about it. And it's sort of coming from the me rather than coming from the you.
Yeah.
Well, I think this was a very interesting experience. I want to come away from this dialogue with a more open mind and open heart to strangers and not automatically pass judgment on them and just learn from them and see what they're all about.
My biggest takeaway is maybe how do we structure that? And I actually think the video was helpful in terms of opening up a dialogue. It just really opened up the door for all these avenues for our own experiences to come through, and it was really cool.
Yeah, we're not that far apart. Maybe I'll bump into you.
Yeah, maybe I'll see you at the grocery store or something.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
All right, well, that quickly became one of my favorite conversations of the day. JC and Garnet spoke to a whole variety of things, actually, half of which that I can absolutely relate to and trigger experiences of my own in terms of ambiguity, in terms of race and labeling and people's need to know what you are. And I also learned a great deal and appreciated JC kind of checking in with Garnet about a couple things and talking about allyship versus appropriation and how to be responsible and thoughtful in that process.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, they were so cute. It was such a pleasant conversation. I was like, oh, I hope they become, actual friends after this.
Also, they're local, so it's actually doable.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think that I think they were both incredibly respectful, and they had a lot of I think similarities in some of their experiences of both living, or I guess sort of being ambiguous in how they present gender-wise and also, racially. So I think that this was a really productive conversation.
Right. Yeah, it very much highlights in-group, out-group, and the role that plays. I mean, folks they're making comments because that's how they feel. And we often check our surroundings. Boys will be boys. Locker room conversation is probably different in the locker room with a bunch of cis jocks than it would be at Thanksgiving dinner with a whole panoply of other folks. So we constantly check. We have our inside-outside conversations, in-group, out-group conversations. There's a default to what are you? And this is coming from somebody who my entire life, probably the most common question that has been asked of me, the most popular 3 words to me is, what are you? Since I was very little. And it's in the first 5 sentences of many interactions since I was little. What are you? And what is that question? Why don't we talk and you'll find out what I am? Because people represent themselves through their actions. But you need some kind of label in order to categorize. It's not always ill-intentioned, but it's definitely annoying. And for both of these folks, it was nice to see them have a shared experience, because they probably don't get it, who am I to say, but it's possible they don't get it very often. Garnet certainly seemed like he doesn't often get to relate to people on that level of what it's like to be ambiguous and always need to be labeled. There is also, I think is worth mentioning, a difference between ambiguity and looking like you're a person of color versus being Black. Anti-Blackness is so specific and it's filled with such vitriol and tradition in this country, at least, that it kind of stands on its own. And by kind of, I mean definitely.
I was looking at some of Professor Lapree's notes, and she was saying that, based on some very specific research, it is proven that when strangers are walking about in the world and, we are passing each other on the streets and standing in line behind each other at restaurants or et cetera, like, those who are ethnically ambiguous get stared at way longer than those who you're able to easily categorize and put in a box. And I wanted to know, like, have you ever found yourself, when you're walking through the world, aside from because of the fact you're Jesse Williams and you are well known, but even before then, like, Have you ever experienced like really noticing like people glaring at you or knowing that like someone is really like trying to figure you out?
Absolutely. In my entire childhood coming up, especially because I lived in entirely Black areas, entirely white areas, entirely poverty-stricken areas, entirely kind of lower middle class. Big, we have a lot of very insulated pockets in this country, and I've lived in many of them and have not fit in any of them. So yeah, I've been the object of that kind of staring, and because they don't know, derision often comes with that. I resent the fact that you're making it harder for me. It's worth noting also just that JC rightly pointed out to Garnet, we should be thinking about how to be an ally, how to be a productive ally without appropriating culture, making sure you are still your authentic self without kind of dibbing and dabbling and sampling cultures without actually having any interest in the roots of their history and how they're impacted in a multitude of ways. All right, let's go into another one of our conversations. This one is between Marlee, and she's talking to Renee.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Hi.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Good. I'm Marlee. Nice to meet you.
I'm Renee. Nice to meet you as well.
So I've seen that happen. I mean, even in LA, as liberal and progressive of a place that we think we live in.
Well, it's nothing new to me, nothing new to us. Yeah, it's something that we've come to expect, something that we experience a lot, and basically pretty much all the time. And it's a shame. It's because it's based on what we look like. You can have all the degrees in the world, but it has nothing to do with any of that.
I went to high school. There was like one Black family in my hometown, and there was a lot of that happening. It happens every day. You see it every day.
I found myself breathing hard. My heart started beating fast because it's so typical, and it makes me angry. When, we go into a store, it doesn't matter how well dressed we are, sometimes we're followed immediately, we're assumed, and it bothers me. It really does. And it's so unfair.
Yeah, I just want to say to that, Renee, that I'm bothered for you, and it makes me so angry. There's so much that I'm learning and unlearning that I realize just being born white and, with a certain privilege and where I grew up, that there's so much that's just innate or learned behavior that you're learning and unlearning. And I'm, trying so hard to just grow and break the cycle. And it's like, if I just hope that we can keep moving forward.
But Marlee, what I appreciate, and I think this is what touches my heart so much, is that at least there's a willingness. And that's what I hear so much from you. There's a willingness to listen. Finally, a willingness to listen, when for so many years it seemed as though if we mentioned something like that, the looks, the stares, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? Somebody looked at you. For some reason, we weren't believed. The curtain has been pulled back, showing the truth of our lives, the truth of what we've had to experience for so many years.
It's so true. And I was protesting a couple of days ago downtown, and this Black man stopped me, and because we were holding a Black Lives Matter sign, and he's like, that starts with you guys who are here willing to fight, put your bodies in front of us, and just stand up, because I had a similar experience, and this is the only way I can relate, where I'm never going to understand, and I know that because of my skin color. I am very androgynous in the way that I dress and express myself, and I've gotten threatening looks and those vibes, I know what you're saying, where it's hard to explain to people, what are you talking about? Where I felt threatened because people are afraid of the unknown, they're afraid of what they don't know. So them trying to figure me out, is she a boy? Is she a girl? And I've had those, I was followed into a bathroom last fall because they thought I was entering the wrong bathroom for my assigned gender. And that was the first time I felt fear, like I was shaking, and I'm shaking just talking about it, because, you know, I was like, who's this person to come in here and tell me that I'm not using the right bathroom, you know, just based off of how I look. But I have that default of like, I'm white, and as scared as I was, I didn't think they were going to shoot me, you know, like I'm never going to know to that extent. It's like, it's frustrating, you see on Facebook, and I have a mixed bag of like progressives and conservatives because of where I'm from. And there's still so many people that it hasn't clicked in and saying all lives matter. And it just shows me that we have a long way to go, but you're right. There is like, it's a start.
Why do you think that they don't get it? Why do you think, is it because they don't want to, or do they think that we're less than?
I wish I could understand that. I think it's, everyone is trapped in their bubble and doesn't have enough exposure. They don't have friends who are of color. Yeah, you can be nice to someone, a person of color, but that doesn't mean you have, you know, racist thoughts, or like in that video, like, you know, you're not going to roll up your window, or they don't see like who you are at work versus who you are. I know I'm a different person at work than I am, you know, here at home with my girlfriend and my dog, you know.
I feel sorry for them. If they knew me, you know, they would recognize that I am a human being just like they are. You know, they would recognize I'm a child of God just like they are. Why are we so hated in this country? It makes me angry and it hurts. And I have grandsons that I worry about. They're sweet as they can be. And to have to worry about them not coming home one day, that's the hardest thing for any mother. And then to hear George Floyd to call for his mama.
I don't have kids. You know, I would like to someday. I was just wondering if you could expand a little bit on that, you know, how that resonated with you when George Floyd did call out for his mom.
Well, I think as a mom, you know, I think that is the greatest joy, I think that, you know, that I've ever had, was to have children. And it's just a miracle to me. It doesn't matter what color you are, the fact that you have this child, you know, that you carried under your heart. So, I mean, you would do anything to protect that child. To take it maliciously like that in front of people, and your child is begging for their life, begging, I can't breathe. It's just unbearable. There are no words, Marlee, there are just no words. There's just so much, I think, that we have to help people to understand. How do you think you can, going forward, help some people understand?
I think I just need to be more willing to have these uncomfortable conversations, especially with family. It's so much easier for me to not combat what they're saying, so to make it, you know, easier for me. But if I'm making it easier for me, I'm not making it easier for you or people of color. So I know that I need to start calling these people out, and, you know, it's a lot of energy, but it's worth the energy if people are being murdered in cold blood.
Hey, Marlee, you said something about when you're at work that you hide your true self, something like that. What was that about?
When I started working in the film industry, I work in art department primarily. There was a lot of men, older men, when I joined, and I'm androgynous, and, you know, I look like how most Cali boys look, with long blonde hair. They would assume sometimes on my first day at a new job that I was just some young guy. There was some times where I felt like I had to hush my voice or not speak until spoken to, so that they didn't hear the tone of my voice or the high pitch, because I felt like they're going to respect me first for being a man. You know, like if there's something I don't know how to do because I'm new, they're not going to judge me like, oh, because she's a young girl.
What made you decide that you wanted to be androgynous?
Looking back now, and like I said, since I've moved out here, there's been so much more that I've discovered about myself in gender and being queer and, you know, playing on the gender spectrum. I have this vivid memory of when I was little. I remember my dad and my brother were outside playing. My dad was like mowing the grass. My brother and I were playing with the ball, and they both had their shirts off. And I kept pulling my shirt off, and my dad's like, no, you can't do that. And I just like didn't understand why that was like taboo. That's how I feel now. Like I've had so many issues with like body dysphoria and ways that I feel about feminine parts of my body that I've just like have now discovered, but looking back, there's been incidences that were always there. And it was definitely difficult. I was like the black sheep of my family. Like I definitely got made fun of a lot because people just did not understand that. I've recently learned that the Black LGBTQIA community is disproportionately marginalized. Do you have any insight as to why that is?
Well, you know what, Marlee, you're going to have to do me a favor, okay? Because they keep adding letters to that. So would you do me a favor and break down the new letters, please?
Lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, agender. So I came out as a lesbian when I was like 20. You know, I started to discover these parts of me and realize it was always there, but it was just kind of suppressed because of the area that I grew up in, or, you know, even my family. Like it was hard for them because even though, like I say, they're pretty progressive and open-minded, it always comes down to, well, when it's your own kid, it's like a different story, you know? So I was just kind of circling back just because I've been seeing so many parallels in my own personal growth and, you know, struggles or obstacles that I've had to face that, like I said, it's not comparable in a sense that I will ever fully understand, but I think it's helpful in this learning and unlearning process of trying to draw your own experiences as close as you can.
You know, back in the 60s, we didn't really talk about that until I got older. We didn't talk about those things.
Do you agree that homosexuality is a sin or not, you know?
The way I was raised in the word from adulthood is that that homosexuality in and of itself, the lifestyle of homosexuality is a sin. And in the Bible, it does say that a man shall not lie with a man. So according to the Bible says everyone has to live out their own salvation. You are going to live your life according to the way you decide to live your life. I'm not going to judge you. That's not my place.
Do you think that being gay is a choice?
I can't be sure. I really can't be sure because I don't understand, you know, just like you say that you don't understand what it's like to be Black and what you've experienced, and you know, to be honest with you, they are not the same thing. They're not. Being homosexual and being Black, I can't even equate the two things because they're not the same thing. But my not understanding homosexuality, I don't know if it's a physical thing, a spiritual thing, a psychological thing. I have no idea.
I can tell you that for me personally, like it's not a choice. There's been times where, like, you know, with people not understanding sexuality or my gender, where there's been so many times it's like, if I just didn't feel like this, of course I would choose the easier route, you know? Like I would choose being straight because that's how society is more accepting, you know? I guess if we were to ever able to meet in person and you saw someone give me the discriminatory look or made a comment to me about my identity, would you stand up for me?
Absolutely. I would stand up for you, Marlee. Absolutely. No one has a right to discriminate against anyone.
Yeah.
Anyone. No one has that right.
Yeah. And not just me, but I guess, or someone like me, or especially people, you know, in the Black LGBTQ community.
That's right. No one has that right.
Thank you. It's just crazy that we've never even met, and like people are going to think this is like a plug. I'm like, we've never met. But like already just in these 2 hours, I feel so connected to you because you have been so open and willing to hear things that I've struggled with. And I'm just beginning to only learn of the things that you've struggled with, but you've been willing to listen and learn just like I'm willing to listen and learn. And it's just really refreshing.
It is refreshing. And I think that's the bottom line. I think we have to be open and willing to listen and learn. Doesn't mean that we're going to agree on everything.
Right. Awesome.
Thank you. Take care.
Talk soon. Bye.
Bye.
So that was a really unique conversation. They were both really respectful. I think it was productive. I think from jump initially, when Renee was explaining sort of her reaction to watching the look and saying, she said she found herself breathing hard and her heart started beating quickly once they entered the courtroom. It's so interesting because I completely relate to those feelings when I'm in those types of uncomfortable situations. It's like this visceral, like these body reactions that I get that are, subconscious. And, I don't realize that, like, oh my gosh, I'm actually soaked because I was sweating out of nervousness for being, walking past this cop or, something like that. And even, Marlee brought up that she also experienced that when she was walking into the restroom and realized that she had been followed into the restroom. And then, her body just had this reaction because it's just like this very specific reaction that I would be so curious to know, like, white people who check off all of these, boxes of power, like, do they ever really experience these, like, body reactions?
Sometimes I think we get into a bit of a suffer off, like a competitive suffering, like measuring who's had it worse. There is a difference between saying, I can relate to having that feeling. I've gotten that feeling when this has happened in a coffee shop, which is different than saying, I know exactly what that's like.
What I did appreciate was when Marlee was explaining her experience of having those body reactions and sort of a little bit of fear when she realized that she had been followed into the restroom, was that, she said that she was really scared, but she acknowledged that she wasn't scared for her life, which is a key difference in, I think, the two experiences. And I think that it was really beneficial and productive for her to validate her feelings and acknowledge that this is how she felt in those moments, but that it is also not the same.
Yeah, it's exactly how it should be done, right? You can have a relation to, you can let somebody know they're seen without making it equal. I thought it was interesting in Renee's answer, if I have this right, Marlee asked about how she feels. Renee, how do you feel? Do you think that it's a choice? Do you think that it's a sin? And if I have it correctly, I feel like Renee answered not from the outset how she thinks, but what she was taught. Which that shows itself in other conversations that we're going through today too, is a bit of a pivot from really receiving the question kind of flush, but saying, what I was taught was this, which is fine. It's important to know, but it's not the answer. It's not really confronting how I feel, and I wonder why that is.
Renee is very similar to a lot of the older Black women in my family. You know what I mean? Like I who are, still trying to figure things out. And me having to explain what non-binary is and all of these things to the older Black folks in my family. So it's one of those things that, can be frustrating if you're not willing and open to learn.
Totally. Especially in fairness, that is an ever-changing world of nomenclature. I don't want to put people off from being curious with this kind of cancel culture that was offensive, because I want folks who are absorbing this to feel like they can ask questions, find a way to do it respectfully. Maybe don't go they keep, just saying, hey, I feel like I might be updated.
Yeah, I think in general, my takeaway from Renee and Marlee's conversation was that it was more of sort of like that generational push and pull based on, keeping up with what's happening in the LGBTQ community and also what's happening in the Black community. Renee as a mother, really touching on as a mother and being concerned that your child will return safely home, and won't be killed or beaten at the hands of those in, privilege and in power, aka the police. So I think there were a lot of different topics that were touched on with this conversation, and I kind of wish it could have gone longer because I think that there was a lot more to unpack, especially on Renee's end, in learning more about Marlee and the queer community and things of that nature. So,
yeah, I would add, I think that Renee, even after the call, I would hope that she sits with the challenges that were put before her, the difference between what I was taught and what I actually think. And maybe you don't know what you think in that time, because now you're actually faced with somebody.
All right, Jesse. So our next pairing will be Judy, who's based in Texas, and Martin, who's based in Illinois. This one was a doozy.
stop what you're doing and watch this video.
Please watch this one, you guys.
I think it's important not only because of what happens, but because of we know folks with a lot of these perceptions and we know the impact they can have. So without further ado, we give you Martin and Judy.
Hello.
Hi.
How you doing? Judy it is.
I'm Judy. What is your name?
I'm Martin. A little bit of background about me. I'm married. I've been married since 2002. I have 4 boys, and they range in age from 34 all the way down to 8.
How old are you?
Now you're getting personal. No, let me stop. No, I'm
you don't
54.
look like you should
I'm
have a 34-year-old.
Oh, no, I'm 54 years old.
What?
I'm a grandfather, yes, the whole 9.
Aw, that's pretty cool.
What's your story, Judy?
I'm 53 and I have 2 daughters.
Well, it's a pleasure meeting you.
It's a pleasure meeting you.
I didn't like what I just saw there, but okay. That wasn't very nice either, them closing the elevator door on my man. That's life in America, because the first thing you see when you see me is a black man. You have no idea what my educational background is, what my financial background is, what my upbringing is. So all you know is that I'm black. The first thing you see when I walk in the door.
I can honestly say the only time I was ever afraid of being in a car and pulling up my window was, I don't know what you call it in Chicago, I think Caprini Green, but it was out of safety. Other than that, I've never really been afraid of Black people, and I've always given everyone the benefit of the doubt, but I don't look at things like that. I have a lot of Black friends.
You just gotta, I don't know, you saw it in the film. If this guy's a judge, he's probably brilliant, probably has money, more money than both of us, but yet they looked at him almost like he was a second-class citizen, and that's what I mean, life in America.
Like, what hurts me is seeing a lot of Black people hurting their own people. Do you see any of that?
Well, I do see that. But always remember this, Judy, people hurt the people that they live around. So I also know from statistics that white people hurt and kill and fight other white people in their areas because that's who they're around. So when I hear about Black on Black crime, I get it because I see it. I'm right outside of Chicago. But I also know if you go into certain areas where there's predominantly white people, they hurt each other too.
If you were in a situation where someone pulled a gun on you, no matter what color, and you pull your gun out, is that trying to protect yourself, or is that you trying to kill somebody?
No, that's self-defense. See, the reason why we're probably on this line right now is because you've seen, and I'm sure you've seen on the news, if you've talked to your Black friends and they really talk to you, then you'll know that there's Black people unarmed that are being killed by police. Sometimes it's unprovoked. Sometimes it's just because the police officer, quote unquote, feared for his life, but there was really nothing to fear, because the person was unarmed. Like if you look at what happened to George Floyd, or look at Eric Gardner, or look at Jonathan Cross, I can go on a laundry list of Black people that were killed that were unarmed. And I always say, well, damn, that could have been me. The problem we have as Black people, we can't have a bad day with the police. I can't do like you could do. You could say, hey, get the hell out of my face, you pig. Why'd you pull me over? You could do that. You could do that and get away with it. I've seen it. I can't do that. The minute I even say, Judy, if I say, well, why'd you pull me over? You questioning me? Get out the car. I've seen it. It's like they're waiting for me to say the wrong thing so that they can do the wrong thing and this thing escalates. That's why I always use that term de-escalation, Judy, because it doesn't have to get that way.
What I'm learning is right, wrong, or indifferent. No one is respecting the police force. There's some bad ones in there, but they're not all bad. So what's kind of scary for me is going forward, Who wants to join the police force? They're damned if they do and they're damned if they don't. You know, George Floyd, he had a laundry list of bad crimes. Trust me and believe in me. That guy should not have done what he done. What I don't like, or what I don't agree with, if you don't mind me saying and help me understand this, is to use him as a martyr.
We never said that George Floyd was our hero. We just know that he died needlessly, and this death was the catalyst that sparked this movement. He wasn't combative, he was subdued, he was already in cuffs and surrounded by police officers.
And he was on drugs.
Well, see, he could have been on a lot of drugs, but when you saw him at that point where that officer's knee was on his neck, there was no struggling. There was no wailing for him fighting. He was already in cuffs, correct, Judy?
Absolutely.
Okay, so and this is why I don't, and I'm not getting on you because I hear this all the time. Whenever one of us dies at the hand of the police or vigilante, we'll come up with something that Trayvon Martin smoked reefer, or Eric Gardner shouldn't have been selling loose cigarettes. You'll hear every type of way to justify those deaths. And that's why I'm going, it wouldn't. See, my thing to you is, even if he was on drugs, I think some people are under the impression that we're idolizing some of these people as heroes when we're not. We're really more focused on the incident and the injustice of the incident than the person, their background, how it happened versus kind of why it could have happened or what their background was, because to us, it's two different avenues.
My question to you is, what do police officers do? And not in this case, because obviously this guy, and he's charged with murder and it's the way it should be. They are up against a lot of bad people. And now they're afraid to defend themselves because as soon as they do, they're ridiculed for it.
All we want them to do is give us the same opportunity to surrender and comply that they do with white people. Let me give you a couple of instances. If you remember, a guy named Dylan Roof shot up 9 Black people in a church. They took him to Burger King alive. The guy, the Aurora killer who killed the people in the theater, they took him alive. I got a young man by the name of Tamir Rice, 12 years old in Ohio. They pull up on him within less than 2 seconds, Judy, that 12-year-old young man was dead. So my question is, well, how did you not give him a chance to comply? Get on the ground, throw your weapon down. You could have done that from the PA. So all we want is the same respect and the same type of compassion and a chance to surrender. Give me a chance to at least go, sir, I'm not doing anything here. Let me live and I can plead my case.
I understand what you're saying. I think that the examples that you're using, and you're giving me a few, there are more examples of Black on Black crime than what you're giving me right now.
Wow.
And it's true. Black on Black crime is over the top. I can give you all type of examples if you want me to. I feel if they can stop doing that to each other, I truly believe things would be better.
I wanted to interject because I've said this to people and I want to get your take on it. Black people know that gangbangers, drug dealers, and thieves kill and rob people. We don't get when police do it. You see, that's the difference. Like, if you want to talk about Black on Black crime, I got you. It's a problem. It's an issue. But I don't expect a police officer to be that gun wielding and shooting me down like the gangbanger did. Like, I can't win.
Going to be honest with you. I didn't see the whole thing. It was disturbing enough what the first police officer did. I'll say this. The other police officers should have said, we have him, he's under cuff, let's go. That's wrong in my mind. What they did was wrong. Like, they should have stopped him and put him in the court system to defend himself. I believe that. But I also believe that not every white cop out there is a bad person and only wants to kill Black people. Like, I don't believe that. I think they try to do their job, and it's gotten a lot difficult to do that because of these situations.
So I understand that. But I also know that they need to step up. Like you just said, if they see a wrongdoing, they need to step up. What you're seeing on the news is the filming of it. There's a bunch of Black people getting beat up, killed, choked out, and abused that you will never see because it wasn't taped. But this has been going on for decades. We've been being beaten and locked up for no reason and the whole nine. But now we're seeing it more on tape.
There's always an epidemic or a protest or something right before an election. I think that has something to do with it.
Black people are getting killed all the time. It doesn't happen just in an election year when Sandra Bland or Trayvon Martin or Eric Gardner or Freddie Gray, like these things are happening every several months, right? You see it on the news. So it has nothing to do with an election cycle. This just happened to happen at, during this time. But what's to stop something from happening in October, right before the November election?
Oh, it's going to.
That makes no sense. Well, I think you know why it's going to, Judy? Because it happens so often. We can almost predict it'll be another video that comes out at some point of somebody getting dragged around or beat around.
Why now? Like, why?
Because there's no excuse now. But it made even white people say he was not resisting arrest. He was already in handcuffs. There were multiple cops around. This was the one that you couldn't deny. Like you could go, well, Trayvon this. Eric Gardner wasn't in cuffs yet. Rodney King wasn't in cuffs yet. They were still a threat. That's all I hear. All I hear from my counterparts, white people, they always can find a way to say, well, he was a bad guy. He was a bad. With this one, even though George Floyd might have had a background in history, when he was being killed, as you even pointed out, he was subdued on his stomach in cuffs, surrounded. He wasn't going anywhere. So for him to die that way, even the majority of everybody who saw that tape, I don't know too many people that wouldn't agree with me, because at the end of the day, if you're unarmed and you weren't really a threat, you should be alive. So if they look me up and I'm driving and they pull me over, they're going to find that I have a concealed carry permit.
Okay.
How do you think they should interact with me at that point?
Do you have a concealed weapon on you? Yes or no? If you say, yes, sir, I do. It's right here. Okay. You're being honest. They're being honest.
Hey, Judy, you remember Philando Castile? Philando Castile was in another Michigan resident, had a concealed carry permit, tells that he's not even driving, his girlfriend's driving, tells the cop, I have a concealed carry permit. When I reach inside this glove compartment, you're going to see the weapon, but this is where my insurance and registration is. He opens up the glove compartment, cop puts one right into his heart. Okay. And he was honest and open. See, but that's our thing. Like, even when we're honest and open and totally transparent, we catch it.
Okay, let me ask you a question. Who should police the police?
The citizens, the same people that are putting mayors in their seats, chief of police in their seat. All you have to do is get what we call a citizens panel. It doesn't have to be a ton of people. It could be 6 or 7 people from different backgrounds, and let them look at the different scenarios and say, okay, I think we got a bad egg.
Scenarios, background, education. Like, you just want some ordinary citizen to start policing the police?
Don't those same ordinary citizens act as jurors in the courtroom?
That actually scares me. Because
what scares us is a prosecutor who works with the police every single day to prosecute crimes, now calling himself being unbiased and neutral, policing that police officer that killed my son. Because, of course, you're not really neutral. You're not non-biased. You work with that guy every day. You guys do coffee, go bowling. How do I know you're going to give me justice for my kid? We got to do better. We can do better. We just got to figure out the system to put in place to make and hold people accountable and force them to do better, because we can't keep doing this. We can't.
I agree. What I've gotten out of this whole conversation is 2 people both believe things are wrong or right, things need to be fixed. And I believe we had a really good conversation, coming up with a good solution from learning from Martin.
Yeah, and I feel that this conversation was beneficial also, because now I get a chance to kind of see where people are coming from outside of my community. And I want to thank Judy for her time, taking part in this conversation, being open and honest with us, because it was great.
Thank you, Martin. I agree. This was really good. Nice to meet you, and hope to talk to you again.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
You too.
I don't know where to start with this one, Freddie. I think that there is a whole lot to unpack here, and I am, frankly grateful for the opportunity, because I think we checked a lot. This conversation checks a lot of the boxes that are in popular belief and on websites and comment threads. So, firstly, I would like to point out, we all know it, the go-to distracting move when talking about putting its boot on the neck of citizens, if those citizens happen to be Black, is the ever distracting, what about Black on Black crime? I would say that whenever you're on a topic in a conversation and the other person needs to change the subject, they are conceding the point.
Yes.
As Martin rightly points out, crime is proximate. Okay, people eat, drink, worship, often work in proximity to where they dwell. So that's that. 85% of white people are killed at the hands of other white folks. There is very little difference in terms of those stats. Again, George Floyd's murder, as they were talking about, there was no Black on Black crime involved. You're just as effective talking about how ham sandwiches are made. She also, I wondered what you think about the default "I have Black friends" move.
Classic.
It doesn't. What does that mean? What does that mean? When do we employ that? We don't employ that when we're talking about sexual assault. Oh, well, I know my sister's a woman. That has nothing to do with what we're talking about. Mm-hmm. Are there some early elements of the conversation that stood out to you?
Before we even jump into this, I just want to say how important it is to really see some of these conversations play out in real time, because you mentioned echo chambers earlier and how we all are sort of, really inundated with our own echo chambers. And it's all down to like who we follow on Instagram, who we follow on Twitter, our news sources. Like everything is pretty much like in line with, I think, our worldviews. And so, when you see things floating around like, well, what about Black on Black crime? And, he was on drugs, so that's why it was okay. Things like that. Those are all just kind of like whispers in the air for me, because I don't surround myself with people who speak that way or who talk about these topics in that way. So to see it play out in real time like this with Judy and Martin was honestly really enlightening to me. It was very triggering, throughout multiple parts of the conversation. But I was like, wow, like these really, people really have these beliefs and are passionate about them. It's not only like, well, I don't really know the answer, but like, this is what I think. It's like, no, Judy was very, very confident in her outlook and on her view with these scenarios. And so it was just, it was really interesting to also watch Martin so gracefully, give his point of view. If I took anything from this conversation, it's just how to be, it was how to be graceful and patient.
This is a perfect example of the role that bias can play and the connective thread between a simple bias and the loss of life and violence upon someone else. If I am predisposed, if I have been taught, indoctrinated is a better word, to believe that Black people are more prone to violence, Black men are more prone to violence, they're more likely to be criminals, which is to say less worthy of the rights which they are promised and pay taxes for and are is woven into the fabric of this nation. If they're more likely to be violent, then when I see an example, or really not see anything, when I hear somebody on a comment thread say they had a criminal history, I'm more likely to make that pathology to be violent offenders, when in the history of the world, clearly there is no one close to as violent as the white male or white society. It's not even close. When you hear a new word, you start hearing that word everywhere. So your antenna's only up for specific dog whistles, specific catchphrases, specific terms and visuals. So she has this little mini box of 5 cliches and 3 sentences that just rotate. Well, Black on Black crime. Well, that doesn't apply here. Okay, but he had drugs in his system and he did crime before. Okay, give me a list of crimes that are punishable by spontaneous public execution. There are none. We have a system of law and order. You said we should follow it. We should let the system take its course. Why aren't we doing that when their skin is dark? When white violence doesn't count, but Black violence can be amplified at any moment, when Black life never matters because its value can be snatched away in a second with a tweet, but white value is perpetual because despite its best effort, it always has value, whether you're shooting up a school or a church. You give them the benefit of the doubt. it's a really tough mountain to climb, and Martin did an excellent job trying. But I'm glad that we have this conversation on display, where you really have to be open at the beginning of a conversation to learn something.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, too, Professor Lepre had sort of flagged the term aversive racism, which I think is really evident in this conversation with Judy and Martin, which is aversive racism is the lack of contact with the group creates stereotypes, right? And so I think it's pretty clear that, like, Judy she says that she has Black friends, right? That does not mean that she has made a habit of surrounding herself with people who are unlike her own in order to learn and sort of break down some of those stereotypes throughout life. So, she was saying that after they watched The Look, she was saying, I've never rolled up my windows or locked my door except for when I was in Cabrini Green. Yeah, for safety, right? And I think, too, white people really like to, instead of saying Black neighborhoods, they'll say high crime areas, which is just code for Black neighborhoods because of redlining and because of the history of this country, and really segregating these communities in ways that Black people specifically cannot control. So I think that was something that really stood out to me. And there was just so many points. I think that we could talk about this conversation, for hours, because there's just so much to unpack here. But I think Martin did a really good job of drawing parallels to white criminals and how they're treated versus how Black suspects are treated. And I think, one of the quotes that stood out to me the most was, give us a chance to surrender like they did Dylan Roof.
I want to just try to put it concisely. What Judy is a real example of is how your bias can come to any case and remix and repurpose the entire experience. If my bias for an unarmed, handcuffed man on the ground is, well, he was violent, yeah, but not this time. Well, he had a history, yeah, but that wasn't part of this. Yeah, but he could have. If you're lobbing, we weaponize our bias. It gives a pre-checklist instead of actually being present and letting that person be a human being. It really is worthy of examination, and we have folks just like her in our family. A lot of us do, and that is where there's a real opportunity to break some new ground here. Because what are you without, as Toni Morrison said, what are you without your racism? Are you any good? Is there a reason you're hiding from it? What are you without it? What if we can actually just talk about these individuals? That's the challenge.
So for our next pairing, we're going to be joining Eric, who's based in Florida, and Danielle, who's based in Illinois. And you guys, I was really nervous going into this one, so tune in.
Hi, Eric.
Hi. Hi, Danielle. I just saw your name pop up there. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I am well. So what do you do for work?
I am in education, so I teach at a law school, and I'm a lawyer by trade.
Oh, so I got to watch what I say. Analyze it. No, that's awesome.
Please don't.
No, that's awesome. I've been a cop for 20 years.
Okay.
So my least favorite place is the courthouse.
Don't feel intimidated by the space.
Oh, please let him be the judge. Oh. Now, I love it. That gave me chills. I like that.
I was taken by this Black man kind of going about his everyday life and experiencing what I would call microaggressions just from the look, and people automatically having certain opinions or thoughts about that individual, and changing their demeanor because of just seeing him as a Black man or a Black person.
You see that happen. You know, people who drive through neighborhoods and lock the doors. If you lock them because it's a high crime area, okay. If you lock them because you see somebody just walking, that's totally different.
You know, one thing that troubles me, Eric, sometimes is seeing the different ways in which officers have handled Black offender, I guess I'll call it an offender, a Black offender versus a white offender, and how white offenders can, you know, honestly cut the complete fool and still be arrested, where, you know, Black folks just don't have that kind of experience, and they end up harmed often and sometimes dead.
It's not acceptable what the officers historically have done. But I also, looking at the sheer number of encounters, you know that, hey, not all of them are bad.
Eric, what is it like to be a police officer right now?
It's horrible because we get judged, and this is going to sound very familiar, by what others have done.
I understand as a police officer, this is kind of, you know, this is unfortunate. You know, one of the things I would say about the George Floyd situation is there were officers that were surrounding him, right? And none of those officers did anything. And I'm not saying that everyone police is like that, but what I am saying is it seems like when officers see something wrong, there is this kind of code of silence, like I'm not going to do anything about it. And I think that also impacts the perception of police officers. If more officers said, we will not stand for this, this is not acceptable, we do not want to perpetuate discrimination, we don't want to perpetuate racism, that is not who we are and what we are about, as opposed to kind of holding on to that themselves, but not stepping up and, you know, and breaking that code of silence.
Oh, I agree. I think some of the things that stop officers from saying something is that if the person they observe doing it is a senior officer, they think, well, I'm a junior officer, what do I know? Or if they're of higher rank, well, one day I want to be to their rank, so I want them on my good side. When these type of horrific events go on in other parts of the country, we talk about it, because the best thing we can do is to not have it happen to us, but is to talk about, well, why did this happen? How can we keep from this happening here? So regarding the incidents around George Floyd, I haven't seen enough to say of the entire video to say that officer did that to that man because he was Black. What I'd seen was an officer who had a subdued subject who was not flailing around on the ground keep his knee and obstruct his airway from what I observed, and there was no need for that.
I think it's, I hear you and understand kind of the perspective of the department, but I really challenge that, because I think that, you know, we're talking about bias, and people have biases, and police officers have biases. And I find it hard to believe that had he been a white man, or even a white, and certainly a white woman, the officer directly involved with the knee on his neck, as well as the officers that were surrounding, that were standing there looking on, would have handled it that way. Can you imagine that officer having his knee on a white woman's neck like that for 10 minutes? That would not have happened, right?
I'm going to tell you, I agree that, do I think that I would see it as a white lady and an officer? No, I agree with you. But you look at the Orlando police sergeant. She was a Black female.
Mm-hmm.
She got murdered by a Black suspect, but there was no Black Lives Matter movement for that. And that's what frustrates me, is you don't see the outcry of police officers getting shot and killed. And sometimes I scratch my head and I wonder, I'm like, why is that?
People have kind of misunderstood that Black Lives Matter was an affirmation directly related to Black people being killed by the police. If you are an officer and that is your line of work, there's the potential that someone, may harm you, may kill you, whether they're Black, white, or what have you. But the expectation in terms, on the flip side, if you are a citizen, is that you will not be killed by the police.
Like you said, we sign up, we put on a badge, a gun, and we go to the work expectation to come home. But the reality is you may not. And a large part of me feels extremely sad that the Black Lives Matter movement has got intertwined with rioters, because that's not it. There's a big difference between protesting and rioting.
Black folks are an oppressed community, and we've been oppressed for the 400 years that we've been here, and slavery with all kinds of policies that negatively affected our lives and our abilities to live the American dreams. People have to understand the history to really understand why those feelings are so deep-seated. When I think about, what happened in Tulsa and what happened in Rosewood, where, Black people who were sustaining their communities and were thriving economically were bombed and slaughtered by white people. We have to keep in mind all of these experiences. So when you're looking at young people out who are protesting peacefully, who are rioting, who are looting, I think that it's all a combination of just that frustration. However it went down, it's gotten the attention that it's needed to get.
So I know that I'm anti-looting, but I'm pro-protesting. Okay, so why loot? And I said, okay, so because I've heard people say, well, they're stealing, the looters are stealing from the communities which they live in. And then I saw something else that said property can be replaced, lives can't. Mm-hmm. So then that got me thinking. So if I'm a looter, other than just personal greed, I'm stealing from a store. The store typically has insurance. So the store will be made whole, but I'm getting my media attention, like you said. I'm getting, I'm getting notice, mm-hmm. whether it's good or bad, I'm getting notice. So as much as I don't agree with it, the insurance companies pay out. Well, if you're paying out more money than you're bringing in, that's a problem for business. That's a problem for these COOs, these CEOs, and who runs them? Typically powerful white men. How do they get in business? Who do they know? Typically politicians. So do I try to look at it as that a looter is saying, this is the only way I can get the powerful person's attention? White, Black, Hispanic, typically white, if you look at the makeup of Congress, this is how I get their attention. Do I agree with it? Absolutely not. Have I tried to understand it? Yes.
That's great that you have tried to understand and just broaden your perspective on it. The recourse that people have to change unjust systems is protesting, advocating, doing policy work, and trying to get to the root causes of some of these issues. So people are in the streets. They're angry, they're rioting because they're trying to get awareness and attention to this issue, because for so long, they've gone through these different kind of measures of change and recourse without action really being taken, or without action taken to the extent that it needs to be done. To tell people how they should protest and what they should do, and what's appropriate and what's not appropriate, I think is out of line. This country was founded by people who protested. The Boston Tea Party and all of these things where they looted and tore things up and so on. The feeling of desperation, the feeling of not having is what pours into the looting part of it or the rioting part of it.
One of the things I'd love to see is not just, hey, we're here and we want change, but what is acceptable? Now the new thing is the disbanding and defunding of police departments that is the push. And What does a real reform look like? What does defunding a police department look like?
The core of that is about money. Since we're paying them, we want accountability. If money from policing is diverted to education, wouldn't that be helpful for the police?
I like that because it makes me go, okay, so it's maybe not 100% a bad thing. What can I do to say this is a step in the right direction?
One thing is just kind of being educated on these issues. There's all kinds of ways to address, to learn about bias, because we all have them, that there are not more officers that are stepping up to say, no, this is not how these situations should be addressed. And this is a result of, a bias or whatever it is, but officers taking on this issue.
Oh, I agree that you have got to have a sense of this is the job you want to do. Don't let anybody call anything into question. Do the right thing all the time.
Thanks, Eric, for this opportunity and joining in this just very important conversation that needs to be had. We need that. We are all dependent on each other for, having some actionable things take place.
We know that there is a process that needs to get started. But what I can tell you is I certainly appreciate you. You represent the city of Chicago very well, so they should be very proud because I am a better person for spending the last couple hours with you.
Thank you. Same here.
So, one of the first things that jumped out at me in this conversation, just at the outset, I just want to have a through line. Several of these other conversations, we have seen this through line of one of the participants reacting to the look video by mentioning whether they like it or not, whether they agree with it or not. And man, Eric really took me on a journey. There's sometimes where my assumption based on what he does for a living as a deputy sheriff, or maybe just the direction of his language sounded like he was going to land somewhere, but he kind of took us on a ride and actually had been quite thoughtful about, he kind of took us through behind the curtain as to how he processed things and weighed pros and cons in an interesting way that was a little more fleshed out than I think folks often do. So I actually appreciated that a couple times in the conversation around as he broke down the rationale or end result of so-called looting.
Yeah, I think too, something that jumped out from jump in this video was that as soon as Danielle told him and revealed that she's a lawyer, you could sort of see Eric's reaction to that. And I think that, I think he was a little bit intimidated by the fact that she's a lawyer and they would be engaging in this conversation about bias. And so I do wonder, like, if she had a different occupation or if he felt a little bit more comfortable and less like, feeling like he needed to stay on his toes, would he have spoken to her or spoken about this topic in the same way?
Eric made a distinction between I'm pro-protesting, I'm against looting, but understanding that we can't, when we talk about policing, the major through line is never the worst among them as the headline. Protesting has very little to do with white agitation and so-called anarchists, people busing themselves in to protest, to obviously be destroying property and instigating property damage. But it detracts. It's easily, if you're not interested in the subject matter, it detracts from the story and has to be addressed in a dominant fashion. It eats up time and energy instead of talking about the real frustration. But he did land on an interesting point about looting actually being the only way to get some people's attention.
Yeah, which was great. It seemed like he had really thought it through versus just saying like, these folks are taking advantage of the situation. They're stealing, they're doing X, Y, and Z, which is the way to deflect from the actual issue at hand. And I think it's important that we keep calling that out, these deflections that keep coming up in these conversations.
And we are in a time which we are now of really having a public conversation about transformational change around policing. We're talking about defunding the police, people trying to figure out what exactly that does and does not mean. In order to really be present for and active in that conversation, you do need to understand some of the context that they're laying out. So that's a step towards saying, okay, if this is not working in the way it claims to be working, if it was, we wouldn't have to talk about it. If people felt both protected and served, we'd be on to a different topic. We defund things all the time. We defund education, we defund healthcare, we defund public assistance. We reduce funding in those departments. And it seems like I felt like Eric really started in a good place in that he was open and would be open to kind of understanding that we actually have a lot of these mechanisms in place. And as a police officer, I think he embodies what a lot of deputy sheriffs or police officers, however you define law enforcement in that case, they know they're not the ones to call for. They're exhausted. They know they're not the ones to call for mental health crises, or when you lost your dog, or for a domestic or a neighbors arguing with each other about the sound, or a driver who pulled over to fall asleep. You know, they know they're not the one that they're spread thin on these issues, and if they're only trained to enforce criminal code with various forms of violence, doing us all a favor by taking that off their plate and putting that into a safer place. So I was glad to see that he was open to kind of wrestle with an idea and not have an easy deflective quip.
And I wanted to really quickly just touch on the idea of around morality as a police officer or as a deputy sheriff or just working in that field in general. One thing that stuck out to me was Eric was saying that, you know, when all else fails, or, you know, if anything's ever in question, I teach my trainees to always do the right thing. And that is, it's too broad of an idea when people's lives are in your hands, right? So it's like, you know, we're sure that the police officer who was on George Floyd's neck thought he was doing the right thing.
Sure.
Your bias directly affects what you think in that moment is the right thing to do. So if we're not all addressing our biases, and because they have the power to, you know, really craft and mold the outcomes of these situations, then there's a larger conversation that needs to be had within these police departments because, you know, I mean, it all starts with bias and it really, across the board, can truly affect whether someone lives or dies.
All right, let's dive into our next conversation. We have Fred calling in from Pennsylvania, and we have Paul from Colorado.
There we go. Sweet. Hey, Fred, how you doing?
Good. How are you doing, Paul?
Oh, just peachy, man.
Where are you from?
Oh, you're a handsome lad.
Thank you.
I'm originally from Montreal.
Married with children?
I married a Puerto Rican woman 2 years ago. Out of that, I got a 22 and a 21-year-old. They're gorgeous kids. Very blessed. Very blessed.
Nice. My oldest son's an engineer, and my daughters go to private school. And my next oldest son was going to private school as well for a while. So we're fortunate to be able to provide our kids with that kind of education.
Let me intercept here on what you just said, that we're very fortunate that we can do this. What does that mean?
That means that I grew up in a pretty rough neighborhood.
Okay.
I had very serious run-ins with the police as a child. I've been arrested 4 times by the police. I've been roughed up by the police several times. I had the unfortunate experience of bearing over 50 kids from gang violence. And then I had a kid die in my arms in 91. And so I've known death a lot. I say fortunate because I've been able to ascend in the job market in our region. I'm the first Black CEO of the company I'm currently in charge of.
I can't relate to what you're talking about because where I come from, we don't have these issues. The biggest problem I had growing up as a kid, it wasn't race for me. I grew up French, okay? I didn't learn to really speak English until I was 12. Most of my education was all in French. And but my name was English. That caused problems at school. I got into a lot of fights in the schoolyard, alleys, or whatever, because I had an English name and I lived in a French sector. A lot of bombs were going off in English sectors. And my mom was very concerned about that because I was going to school in an English area. Then I ended up moving back to Colorado in 1996, and I've been here ever since. I can't agree to a lot of the visuals I just saw because that's just not who I am. I've never been a part of that and never will. And so I find it disturbing. And I think the idea, the deep idea has really not improved.
For me, unfortunately, I resonated very much with the video. In particular, him being a judge. I have some level of recognition in the city of Pittsburgh, and so I get treated differently if I come into a place and I'm dressed down. People don't even speak to me. People that have known me for years, and so people are used to this suit being me. I would say, from a context perspective, there has always been slavery all around the world for millennia.
Oh, yeah.
The kind of slavery that took place in America is the only one of its kind, chattel slavery. For 246 years, America used Black people from the continent from sunup to sundown to create a superpower in less than 200 years. After 246 years of slavery, it was followed by 135 years of institutional racism, Jim Crow laws, redlining, making it illegal for Blacks to have the same benefits of their white counterparts, even after they went to fight in the world wars. And now in America, we have 55 years of alleged freedom and equity, which many of us in America don't see that way. And I can tell you that my experiences as a Black man with education, having went to school several times, I am challenged every day by microaggressions. I'm challenged when I walk in the store. I know that feeling of sitting in a restaurant and people being directed to sit near you and they go, no, I want to sit over here. I know that, and you have to tell your child it's okay when it's not okay. And so Paul was very interested and struck by your experiences, and also struck by the fact that that video didn't move you because you never had that experience and that's not you. But were you able to, for a moment, put yourself in that person's shoes and window and just wonder for a brief moment what that might feel like?
Well, let me interject here. First of all, it's not that it didn't move me. It did. It pissed me off. You know, Fred, I'm just not seeing that this country, as I mentioned earlier, is really improving.
Have you ever thought about or had to talk to your daughter or to your new children in your marriage about any kind of interaction where their race or beliefs might cause them some social discomfort or be challenged by authorities?
If I had to have a conversation with my kids about this, it would be hard for me because I wouldn't know pretty much where to start because, I mean, I haven't had this problem. But you know what? You have to, because they're being bombarded with this 24 hours a day.
How I treat and talk to my children is very much reflective of the environment that they walk into every day. Mm-hmm. One of the most difficult conversations I've had to have with my sons is how to conduct yourselves when the police pull them over, and they will get pulled over. My most difficult conversation was years ago having my oldest son drive one of my vehicles, and be pulled over by the police and harassed physically because he was driving a very expensive vehicle. Then the officer threw him up against the vehicle and would start harassing him about what does his father do or mother do? And so, that really hurt us. What you see today in the marching and the sit-ins and the protesting, it's really saying enough is enough. You've had your foot on our necks, literally, for 400 years, and we're not going to take it anymore.
Well, I'm going to say something about the protest movements. The change or the difference I've found is that this became global. You were having different countries in the world that were walking around with banners on what happened to George. Even my country. Now, I've got some interesting feelings about this looting and all this stuff that's going on behind the protesters, because that's not the message. So I think that's something that might have been thrown in the wash and tainted. Why don't you look at the other side of the fence? The police department, what they're dealing with. Okay, they got a job to do, but I think some of them, unfortunately, take that badge and the equipment that comes with it a little too seriously. And unfortunately, there's a problem there. And it's everywhere in this country. Okay? We know we've got a sideline of cops that work together as a unit. They back each other up, and they're all part of a little clique that sometimes causes problems like this. And they feel because they have this uniform, they can take all this authority.
One of the things I honor about people is when people are transparent and fully vulnerable. And I think that's something that men in particular struggle with. Our bravado, our disposition, the things people expect us to do and focus on, it really has created a false sense of control for us. And so, Paul, I feel like we come from two different sides of the world. There are some similarities in how we were raised.
I'll tell you something right now in comparison to where we relate again, is that growing up, I didn't have anybody to guide me. I didn't have a father, okay? I didn't have a father to guide me, to give me wisdom, to teach me, to basically even back me up. And so my whole life as a kid, I had like a mask on. And I was always trying to be something that I wasn't, because I didn't feel I was good enough.
It's funny, the more that you talk, the more we have similarities. I grew up from a broken home. My mother and father divorced when I was young.
Yep.
When you allow yourself to listen to another person's perspective, you realize that many of their experiences mirrors your own. But when you dig deeper, and this is implicit biases, I can look at him and he can look at me and go, hey, that's a black guy. I could go, that's a white guy. But after an hour and a half, 2 hours, we're two different people who happen to have one brown skin, one white skin. But the people who possess those skins are not defined by black or white. And I think that's the importance of having conversations about bias and implicit bias, is that it allows us to expand our own horizons in a way to push us to new levels of understanding, appreciation, and patience that is required for us to figure out how we're going to turn this thing around. I need Paul. It's the totality of all of our experiences that are going to offer solutions to the global phenomenon we face.
I could just see us, bumping into each other in a bar, and we would have this conversation. And I'm pretty sure he'd probably say, "You're not from here, are you?" And but there should be more people that are not from here.
When you find a kindred spirit, it's really about honoring their humanity in ways that allows the DNA of the exchange, the conversation, to live in a part of you so that you always honor the person who moved you or filled your vessel with a different fluid that allows you to have more diversity of thought, action, and belief. So I appreciate that, and thank you.
Well, as I would say, à la prochaine fois, mon ami, which means until next time, my friend. As long as you don't say it twice, that means you got to go somewhere. All right, man. Love you, buddy.
All right. Love you,
Take
man.
care.
Appreciate you. Yes, sir.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Well, that was a cute little ending to a conversation. I felt like they had this like really beautiful camaraderie and almost like a brotherhood by the end, which was really refreshing and nice to see. Just a reminder, you guys, these are strangers. This was their first time ever speaking to and meeting one another. So the fact that they were able to share experiences and sort of compare and contrast and then, end it on such a really loving note was really nice.
Yeah, it was sweet. I think that it's also an example because they're very different. They have very different experiences, as were highlighted through the conversation, which we'll talk about, and some presuppositions and misunderstandings or different understandings of reality. But what it does show is really, for me, the value of these conversations, because you start where you are. It doesn't matter if you're 15 or 55. You start where you are in terms of exposure and wrestling with new ideas, being challenged on your position. There is no too early in this case, we're talking about adults, to have these conversations. I feel like Fred challenged Paul on a lot of his presuppositions. We talked about the aging up of Black youth, this making them, we've had studies that demonstrate that there's after about 9-10 years old, Black minors become adults. They get older than the way they actually are to make them more threatening. They are inflated. Their persona is inflated to make it more dangerous, menacing, easy to be described as a threat. These are things that Paul was familiar with, but whenever he gets exposed to it, he will be forever changed. You can't unsee and unlearn historical context. So that's really one of the beautiful things about having these conversations.
I want to quickly jump into the idea of parenting and sort of the difference between, how white people are raising their children versus how Black people are raising their children, and the conversations and how the conversations differ, right? So Paul was saying, he wouldn't even know where to start in terms of having these conversations with his kids about racism, about bias, about prejudice, and how to be more aware of your own so that you can make the lives of others who are different from you better, like help them have a little bit more of a better day than they may have previously experienced before coming in contact with them. But then Fred was saying, like, after watching The Look, he was like, oh yeah, I can completely relate to all of these scenarios. I've had the elevator door shut on me. People have locked their doors when I've walked by, and he wears suits for work, so he notices a real difference in how he's treated when he's wearing suits, and then when he's out with his kids and these microaggressions happen, he has to sort of lay low, not get too visually upset, and sort of to calm the situation and to de-escalate it, tell his kids, it's okay, it's not a problem, when it is a problem. And I think that that's something that I think that, I can absolutely relate to in terms of just sort of that, how I was raised versus I think, how some of my white counterparts were raised who don't really deal with that.
Yeah, it's exhausting to have to consistently pace yourself and be able to make it through. Do I use all my energy on this now? Do I change the whole experience in the room, or do I want to just get out of here and take a breath and deal with it in the car or later? The degree to which we don't have control over the onslaught, control over when the wave is going to crash on us, and what a luxury it is to just not ever have to be confronted with this or have to talk to your family about it, and just being able to go about your life pursuing your dreams and interests. And whether the realities of our experience is not for you to agree, it's not a matter of agree or disagree. It's a matter of, do I care or do I not, and being interested.
I think a big takeaway for me was also sort of had to do with the short film, The Look, and, Black man walking through the world, being mistreated, and then the reveal at the end is that he's a judge. But I think something to really highlight here is that even if he was not the judge, even if he was the bailiff, or even if he was the custodian, he still does not deserve to be treated in any of those ways. Even if people who belong in marginalized communities are not stand-up citizens or aren't heroes, they still deserve respect and they still deserve to go home at the end of the day.
Decency, fairness, and freedom does not have to be re-earned every time a black person steps outside of their house when white people just get to be white. All right, let's go into this conversation, which really stood out to me. This is between Kaylah, who calls in from New York, and Angela, calling in from California.
There's some gems.
Hi.
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 I'm Angela.
I'm Kaylah.
Nice to meet you.
You too. I feel like I have experienced the look my whole life in higher education in predominantly white spaces, like people assuming I don't belong somewhere or wondering why I am somewhere.
For me, what really stood out is having these stares. And while I didn't grow up with that, actually growing up, it was quite the opposite. No one seeing me as an Asian American. And then now we go from, in the time of like COVID-19, we go from invisibility to hyper visibility. So when I walk out that door, I am hyper vigilant of the ways in which I take up space, right? If I sneeze, is someone going to give me a dirty look? Are people going to scoop back when they see me because I'm Asian? And we too have been hurt by systemic injustice.
Yeah. Everyone has their own biases. Everyone is biased in some way about something or somebody. And then the line between just being biased and being racist is like what you do after that.
I think it's important to talk about bias because it dispels any taboo or stigma there is, right? When you name it, when you call it out, when you know what it is, it kind of flashes the light like on it, right? It can no longer hide in the dark.
For my undergrad capstone project, I did a case study on this woman, this Black woman who was in jail and she was pregnant and she died in jail because she had an ectopic pregnancy and the officers and the nurses didn't help her. The other inmates were saying like, hi, like, can you hear her? She's like dying, and nobody did anything. But in doing my research, we see that those same guards and nurses in that same jail 15 years earlier let the same exact thing happen to another Black woman from the same exact cause.
When you're saying that too, with the whole, like kind of the health disparities between Black and brown communities, like I'm thinking about the father of gynecology, like perfected his fistula operation on slave women without anesthetics.
Something that we talked about a lot in my classes and in my extracurriculars during my master's was that this kind of like general idea that Black children and Black women, girls in particular, kind of seen as older than they are and seen as like being able to withstand pain.
I think a lot of our understanding of this comes, you know, growing up is obviously in our history books, and they don't talk about stuff like this. And they kind of paint the whole civil rights movement as like, oh, like Dr. King came and he fixed racism. Rosa Parks fixed racism and now we're good, you know? And kids are kind of growing up and they're like, you know, they see these things happen and like, wait, but I thought like racism is fixed. No.
Yeah.
Like,
the first person to like do the Rosa Parks thing, I guess, and not get off the bus was this young, dark-skinned girl who was pregnant. But they didn't want her to be the face of the movement. There's so many facets of bias and racism within communities, even, not just between communities. My dad, he's very light-skinned, and I tried to tell him one time that colorism is a thing and light-skin privilege is a thing. And he was like, no, it's not. When I go places, like, people respect me because I'm me. And I was like, okay, but he almost couldn't recognize that if we were to go someplace, we wouldn't get the same reaction because, like, me being a darker skinned Black woman and him being a lighter skinned man, like, not only is there the lighter skin privilege, but also just you being a man in a lot of spaces that holds like a lot of weight.
I have also had a few conversations regarding, I guess, just like microaggressions. One conversation was with my supervisor because I experienced a microaggression at work. And he is a white male. He's in his 50s. And the first thing he says is, Angela, you know, I will never be able to understand your experience. I recognize that I am a white male, but can you help me understand? And I literally broke down when he said that because it was such a place of humility, you know, that he took. And I strongly believe that, you know, like, the person in the conversation in the room that has the least power should not be the person to bring up the hardest topic, right? And I think that he created a space where he recognized that and he kind of lowered himself to elevate me.
I love that story.
My question for you would also be like, how does your community, and I'm speaking specifically Black community, view Asian Americans?
I have personally seen and experienced a fair amount of racism from, I don't want to say the Asian community, but specific people, but I've also experienced the opposite. But I do think that, in particular when traveling abroad, it's like something that I think about a lot, just the way that anti-Blackness is everywhere. And also like, and this is, I don't think this is just an Asian thing. I think a lot of non-Black communities want to have the benefits of Blackness, but none of the other stuff that comes with it, none of the negative things that come with it.
I think that there is a history of strife between the Asian community and the Black community, and I think a lot of it is designed. The model minority, that model minority term was created by white people as a way to perpetuate anti-Blackness. What the model minority myth is when, you know, basically a term that white people have created saying that Asians, you know, look how hardworking they are. They are a group of people that can pull themselves up by the bootstraps. Look how successful they can be in our society. And then kind of pit that against the Black community and be like, why aren't you doing anything? If this group of immigrants, right, can do this, why can't you? To only justify like their position of, oh, like, we're not racist, right? You're the problem. So I think we must understand that, how we've been used in that way, like weaponized, you know, against the Black community. We have this like perpetual foreigner status, right? Like, we are a model minority until you're a perpetual foreigner. It's kind of like the idea of like pet to threat, right? Like, we're good with you until you are like, coronavirus happens and you're a threat, like you're yellow peril. Right.
Yeah. Wow. In kind of the beginning of the pandemic, I guess, I had like a little bit of a heated conversation with a friend of mine because he had been in Shanghai for work. And when he came back, his coworker said something like, I hope you didn't bring anything back. We're going to have to separate one of the like Asian American employees. And he told me about it later, and I said, okay, so what did you say? And he said nothing. And I was so upset because in that moment, that person has enough either respect for you or has enough of a relationship with you to tell a joke like that. Then it's on you to use that position to say, hey, this is not okay. It's just unacceptable at this point to not speak up about things, because especially when the other person is not in the room to defend themselves. I feel like you can't choose when to be like anti-racist, because all these issues are connected and all these issues affect real human beings.
How do you think Asian Americans can show up for Black lives in an Asian American way, which however you perceive that?
For a start, I would just say like using your own voice to like speak out generally, and then also recognizing the privilege that some people have to like benefit from Black culture and Blackness, but not have any of the like bad implications of it. And then also like making space for like when you're elevated to a certain level, like making space for other people like you in that level. Whether you're like a woman in the boardroom, like make room for other women in those spaces, or make room for other people of color in those spaces, I think is important.
I think oftentimes the racial discourse has been under a binary of Black and white, and that kind of renders people in between as feeling invisible or feeling irrelevant to the discourse. And I think that's why a lot of people feel like they can't speak up, because it's always about Black and white, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so what would be helpful is like to even offer space to people of like non-Black people of color to have those voices too, you know, because there is something unique about their experiences, right, that is going to contribute to allyship.
Just like I might expect like friends of mine to be allies for the Black community, I expect for myself to be an ally for other communities, including the Asian American community, including the Hispanic, Latinx communities, including any and everybody.
I really enjoyed our conversation, Kaylah, and like you said, I think that we do have a lot in common, and everything that you were saying, my heart was like, yes, like even though our experiences are different, like that feeling of like not being seen, it like is so like just, it's like the theme of our conversation.
Yeah,
right?
For sure. Thank you for talking with me.
Yeah, thank you so much for everything that you shared with me. I think it's just something that I really will treasure. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
I love the discussion around women's health. They really sort of did a deep dive on women's health in regards to especially Black women in particular, and how our bodies have been used for centuries within the medical field to test and to prod and pry and figure things out. And specifically from, the quote unquote father of gynecology, J. Marion Sims, he was perfecting his process on Black women's bodies, only to, blow up and really start this whole sector of the medical field that hadn't really been ironed out yet.
Black women are constantly kicked out of hospitals or left for dead and neglected because they are not only not treated as valuable human beings, but their symptoms must be, it's also gendered, because they must be hysterical because they're women. They're considered to be stronger like oxen because we're, born here as chattels, as pieces of animals, not human beings. So all that stuff, all that bias, the slightest bias, well, I just thought she was asymptomatic, or I thought that was probably just indigestion. That is fueled by a bias. Like they're less reliable people. They can't be trusted to know themselves or others as well. They're less mature.
Or they can handle it.
Yeah, they're stronger. y'all are just you're the face of undying strength.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I can say myself, I've heard the term time and time again in regards to the Asian American community as being the model minorities, that kind of thing. But I just, and it totally makes sense, but I never, like, the way that she articulated it was so eye-opening, because she was saying, that term was developed by white people in order to weaponize Asian people to really separate the marginalized communities from each other so that we can't band together and we don't feel like we are sort of all in this together. It's really a lot of that separation. It's just like colorism and slavery. White people, and having the house slaves and the field slaves, really driving that friction between these communities.
One of the things that I'm reminded of in this conversation is when I was studying the Black Panthers, I think in high school, and learning about Japanese and Asian support for the Black Panthers and the term yellow peril, and seeing it was one of the first examples to me of one minority standing up for the other. We're used to seeing it around gender or sexual orientation in this generation. Men standing up in the Me Too movement and advocating, people advocating against sexual assault or rape culture, or certainly straight cis culture standing up and advocating for those in the LGBTQI community. So we're used to the structures there, but in the minority community, there tends to be such isolation, which is both its strength and in many ways possibly its weakness, because it creates separateness.
Yeah, and I think, it sort of brings us back to the idea of allyship versus appropriation, and making sure that if you are taking and, appreciating the cool parts of certain cultures and like the parts that are like convenient, make that are fun, right? But that you're also doing research and you're also acknowledging and amplifying the bad that also goes, on within those communities in efforts to change, So I think it's really just being intentional.
I think an example of that, Freddie, that is worked to communicate this idea to others is you have Black women's hairstyles have been banned, made unprofessional. You can't wear them, right? Basically, all the any hairstyles that white folks can't do are considered unprofessional for Black women. Various braids, dreadlocks, twists, bantu knots, etc. They're just considered unprofessional. Just happens to be primarily Black hair expression. But once you start seeing pop culture icons that are white or not Black wearing cornrows, and they rename them as something else, and they're on runways for Chanel and Dior and do-rags and all these things that we weren't allowed in your establishment. If we had our hair that way, if we wore Tim boots, if we drank this beer, there's all types of codified racism, right? An example of how to be an ally is once you get in with that hairstyle, advocating that we all get in. If you just walk in and leave them all out in the cold, that's when you're appropriating. That's when you're actually not down for anything but yourself.
Beautifully put.
Well, that completes this round of conversations. I think we covered a lot of ground, had people from all over the country being really personal and having really productive conversations. I think there's a lot to break down. You're doing it in the comments with Dr. Lepre, and we've tried to do our part by carrying you through some of these things and sharing our thoughts, insights, and experiences.
Yes, thank you so much to all the participants. This was such a valuable experience, and hopefully all the viewers enjoyed it and learned something as well, because I definitely did.
Yeah, it does take some bravery. I don't know if all of us would have signed up to go in blind for these one-on-one conversations, sight unseen, and for it to be broadcast around the world. Hats off to you all for stepping up and being brave enough to have some of these conversations. I've taken a lot from this experience, I must say. I think throughout we talked about some of the commonalities that reared their heads, not necessarily good or bad, but in a way that really helps us kind of understand exactly why we do exercises like this. Any ideas that stuck out to you as particularly resonant, and where people showed some growth?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone walked out, hopefully, and I really do think, based on what we were able to see, I think everyone walked out of this experiment a little bit more aware. And I think that is the goal. It's not about being perfect. It's not about not having bias. We all have our biases. And so I think that it's really important that you recognize them. And then what really counts is what you do once you recognize them and how you sort of affect change in the world.
And that's what we've seen so much of in this last year is folks letting those biases tumble until they grow so heavy that they can't be stopped and people just get out of control. I'm glad that didn't happen in any of these conversations, so we could actually have productive dialogue. Really impressed by the ability of a lot of our participants to step up, to adjust, to not like what they hear, but still find a way to stay on an even keel and have a productive conversation. I'm really happy we did this, and again, thankful to P&G and BuzzFeed for creating a space for it. It's pretty damn smart.
Yes, thank you so much. And it's been great chatting with you, Jesse, and just getting to know you more and really bounce ideas off of each other. I feel like it was, I can't think of a better pairing with us, you know?
For real. So take the show on the road.
Yeah.
One of the main goals for today's experiment and conversation is for you to walk away with some more confidence, some more tools, some more courage to have similar conversations about bias with the folks around you. We've also created a resource guide for how to best have these conversations in, can't stress this enough, a productive manner. All right? The only point is not just an exercise in getting your bars off, and it's about actually how can you move the ball forward. And it's not always the person, I would say, that you're talking to, it's the others that are listening as well. So we've partnered with a few organizations that are leading the charge in this department and work with them to develop a detailed plan to help in the best ways that we can. Some of that includes learning about historical and present day experiences that fuel systematic racism, that fuel inequality, ways that you, where you live, wherever that is, you can activate your local communities directly. You can be an ally, an advocate, an activist. You can certainly be anti-racist. We've talked before, and the choice that P&G put together really does a good job of illustrating that you can't be neutral on a moving train, as Howard Zinn used to say. You have to be anti-racist. Donate to these organizations that we've laid out that advance equity and justice. There are people that are really spending their time and energy on justice for folks. They need our support, and they need our money, obviously, also. And we can't stress that enough. All it takes is, in life, these little pivot points where you're exposed to something that you otherwise wouldn't, and it might inform a lot of decisions going forward. So go ahead and share the video. You could have some really interesting conversations, not only for yourself, but for others. So go ahead and click the link on the video description for a page with more details on how to learn, how to activate, and donate. Freddie, I think we came, we saw, we learned. I'm really pleasantly surprised. I didn't know how this was going to go. I was excited about it, but I'm proud of what we not only learned and experienced, but shared with each other today. So I want to thank you for your time, energy, and expertise. Really made a world of difference.
Yes, thank you so much. I love talking about this stuff. I could talk about it all day. So this is not work for me. It's definitely something that is more than that for me. So I'm happy to be a part of this whole experiment and project as a whole. And to everyone watching, thank you so much for watching, and stay safe, stay loud, and create change.
That's right. Peace.